She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't even raise her voice. That's what made it so devastating. My daughter-in-law stood up from the dinner table, looked directly at me, and with the kind of calm that only comes from months of internal rehearsal, she said something I never thought I would hear in my own home. "I need you gone by sunrise. You have until the sun comes up tomorrow to pack your things and leave this house. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the authorities to remove you." The room went silent, and I mean the kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears, where time seems to stop. My grandchildren froze mid-bite. My sons looked at each other, unsure whether to stand up or sit down. Their wives stared at their plates like the answer to this nightmare was somehow written in the vegetables. And me? I sat there, widow for 2 years, mother of 3, grandmother of 6, someone who had given everything to keeping this family together, and I was being told I had until sunrise to leave the one place I thought I would always belong. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't a sudden explosion. This wasn't a moment of anger or impulse. This was the final crescendo of a symphony of resentment that had been building for 2 years. And the thing is, I didn't see it coming. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to believe it. This is the story of what happened that night, and more importantly, it's the story of what I did after. Because after that ultimatum was delivered, after I left that table and walked to my room and stared at the ceiling for 3 hours trying to make sense of the wreckage of my family, I did something that changed everything. I picked up the phone, and I made a call that should have been made a long time ago. Welcome to Her Untold Stories. I'm your host, and if you ever feel like your family doesn't see you, if you've sacrificed everything only to feel unwelcome in your own home, if you've stayed silent to keep the peace while slowly losing yourself, this story is for you. So please, stay with me, because this journey is about to get real, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to finally speak up. Before we go deeper into this story, I need to ask you something. Hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to reveal will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, obligation, and what it really means to belong. Let's go back 2 years to the moment everything started changing. My name is Margaret, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 67 years old, and until 2 years ago, I had what most people would call a good life. I was married to my husband, Thomas, for 43 years. He was a good man. Not perfect, nobody is, but he was stable, kind, and devoted to our family. We had 3 sons, David, Michael, and James. They grew up in a house filled with love, with structure, with tradition. Thomas died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning, just like that. One moment he was reading the newspaper at the breakfast table, and the next moment he was gone. I won't go into all the details of grief. Most of you know what loss feels like, that peculiar weight, that way the world keeps moving while you feel frozen, that guilt when you catch yourself laughing at something and then immediately feel terrible because how dare you laugh when he's gone? Thomas's will was straightforward. The house, a beautiful 4-bedroom home that we had bought together in 1982, was left to me. His savings were to be divided equally among our 3 sons. There were some investments, some retirement accounts, nothing extraordinary, a modest estate managed with the kind of care that Thomas managed everything in his life, methodically, thoughtfully, fairly. After he died, I had offers. My sister asked me to come stay with her. My oldest son, David, offered to let me live in his home with his family. My youngest son, James, suggested I travel, see the world while I still could, maybe find a senior community where I would have people my own age. And my middle son, Michael, the one I had always been closest to, the one I had stayed up all night with when he had chicken pox, the one I had driven to soccer practice for 8 years, the one I had helped through his first heartbreak. Michael looked at me with this expression of concern mixed with something else, something I couldn't quite identify at the time, and he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said something that, in retrospect, was the beginning of the end. I think I want to stay in the house for a little while. I'm not ready to leave it yet, but I don't want to be alone. Michael nodded, and then he said, "Well, Eleanor and I have been talking about needing more space. We're thinking about moving in with you, if that's okay, just until we get our finances in order. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year." And because I was still in the fog of grief, because staying in the house with family seemed like a way to not be completely alone, because I didn't want to say no and risk the one family member who had shown real interest in being near me, I said yes. "Of course," I said. "I'd love to have you here." That was the moment everything began to shift. Now, I need to be very careful here. I'm not going to demonize Eleanor. That's not what this story is about. Eleanor is a woman with her own story, her own pain, her own perspective on all of this. But what I'm going to tell you is my side of what happened. Eleanor and Michael had been married for 12 years at the time Thomas died. They had 2 children, Sophie, who was 10, and Ethan, who was 7. Eleanor worked part-time as a medical assistant. She was organized, capable, and, from what I could tell, unhappy in her marriage. This wasn't something she hid well. There was a tenseness between them, a lack of warmth, the kind of marriage that looked fine from the outside, but clearly had cracks running underneath. When they moved in, they came with 4 suitcases and the kind of energy that suggested they were planning a longer stay than 6 months. Michael and I cleared out Thomas's office, a room I hadn't been able to look at since his death, and converted it into a bedroom for them. They brought their children. Suddenly, a quiet house with 1 widow became a full house with 5 additional people. I told myself this was good, this was healing. Having grandchildren around, having the sounds of life returning to the space that felt so empty since Thomas died. But there were undercurrents I didn't want to see. The first time it happened, I almost missed it. Eleanor and I were in the kitchen. I was making my mother's recipe for Sunday dinner, a pasta sauce that took 4 hours to simmer. It was a recipe I had made for Thomas for 43 years. It was a ritual, a way of honoring him, continuing the tradition. Eleanor came in and watched me for a moment. Then she said, "You know, you don't have to do all that work. We could just order takeout." It was a small thing, a casual suggestion, but something in the tone made me feel less than. Like my effort, my tradition, my way of processing grief through cooking was somehow excessive. "I enjoy it," I said simply. "Yeah, but it's a lot," she said, "and your kitchen gets hot. Isn't that uncomfortable for you?" I realized what she was doing. She was creating narratives about me, stories that positioned my choices as burdensome, when really what she was doing was making me feel unwelcome in the kitchen, in my own home. But I didn't say anything. I let it go. This became a pattern. Every suggestion Eleanor made was framed as being for my benefit. The pasta sauce was too much work for someone my age. My morning walks were nice, but wasn't I worried about falling? Maybe I should stay home. Wasn't it better if I stayed in my room in the afternoons while the children did homework? That way they wouldn't be distracted. Slowly, inch by inch, Eleanor was creating a space for me that was smaller and smaller. And what made it so insidious was that she was kind about it. She never yelled, never was directly cruel. She just created conditions where I felt like an intrusion in my own home. 3 months after they moved in, Michael came to me with what he called a conversation we need to have. "Eleanor and I have been talking," he said carefully, "and we were wondering if it would be possible for us to stay longer than we originally planned. Maybe indefinitely, actually. We're thinking this could be permanent." I felt something drop in my stomach, not because I didn't love my son, but because something in his tone suggested this wasn't actually a question. This was a decision being presented to me as a request. "Where would you live?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Here," Michael said, Eleanor really loves this house, and the kids need stability. And honestly, Mom, we can't afford our old place anymore." What he didn't say was that Eleanor had been pushing for this, that he felt caught between his wife and his mother, that he was too conflict-averse to draw a boundary. "Michael," I said carefully, "I love you, and I'm happy to help you during a difficult time, but I need to be clear. This is my home. It's the home your father and I bought together. It's where I'm grieving, and I need to know that you understand." "Of course I understand," he interrupted. "That's why we want to be here, to help you through this." But that wasn't what was happening. What was happening was that Eleanor had identified a vulnerable woman, a grieving widow who was lonely and desperate for family connection, and she was moving in permanently. Within 6 months, Eleanor had rearranged nearly every room in the house. The furniture Thomas and I had chosen together was moved to the basement or sold. New furniture that matched Eleanor's aesthetic was brought in. My bedroom became acceptable. The kitchen became hers. The living room became a space for the children. The dining room, where we had shared thousands of meals as a family, became Eleanor and Michael's space for entertaining their friends. And I became the woman who lived upstairs, the widow who kept to herself. The worst part? My other 2 sons didn't see what was happening, or maybe they saw it and didn't want to get involved in the conflict. David was busy with his own family, James had moved to another state, Michael was caught between 2 women, trying to keep peace. So I became invisible in my own home. But there's more to this story, because the financial part, the part that really hurt, was just beginning. You see, Eleanor had a plan. I didn't know it yet, but a plan had been in motion since the moment she walked through the door. One morning, about 8 months after they moved in, Michael came to me with documents, legal documents. "Eleanor and I have been thinking about the future," he said slowly, "and we want to propose something that would benefit everyone. We want to buy the house from you." I was confused. "What do you mean, buy the house? It's my home." "Well, exactly," Michael said, "and if you sell it to us, you'll have money, capital. You could travel, you could buy a condo somewhere, you could have actual cash in hand instead of it being tied up in property that you're living in alone." "But I'm not living alone. You're living here with your family." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Right, and Eleanor thinks, we think that it would be better if we owned it. That way we could make renovations we want to make. We could have our own space without feeling like we're living in someone else's home." I realized what was happening. Eleanor had convinced my son that it was my fault he felt like he was living in someone else's home, that the solution was for him to take the home away from me.
"Here, to help you through this." But that wasn't what was happening. What was happening was that Eleanor had identified a vulnerable woman, a grieving widow who was lonely and desperate for family connection, and she was moving in permanently. Within 6 months, Eleanor had rearranged nearly every room in the house. The furniture Thomas and I had chosen together was moved to the basement or sold. New furniture that matched Eleanor's aesthetic was brought in. My bedroom became acceptable. The kitchen became hers. The living room became a space for the children. The dining room, where we had shared thousands of meals as a family, became Eleanor and Michael's space for entertaining their friends. And I became the woman who lived upstairs, the widow who kept to herself. The worst part? My other 2 sons didn't see what was happening, or maybe they saw it and didn't want to get involved in the conflict. David was busy with his own family. James had moved to another state. Michael was caught between 2 women, trying to keep peace. So I became invisible in my own home. But there's more to this story, because the financial part, the part that really hurt, was just beginning. You see, Eleanor had a plan. I didn't know it yet, but a plan had been in motion since the moment she walked through the door. One morning, about 8 months after they moved in, Michael came to me with documents, legal documents. "Eleanor and I have been thinking about the future," he said slowly, "and we want to propose something that would benefit everyone. We want to buy the house from you. I was confused. What do you mean, buy the house? It's my home. Well, exactly, Michael said. And if you sell it to us, you'll have money, capital. You could travel. You could buy a condo somewhere. You could have actual cash in hand instead of it being tied up in property that you're living in alone. But I'm not living alone, I said. You're living here with your family. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Right. And Eleanor thinks, we think, that it would be better if we owned it. That way we could make renovations we want to make. We could have our own space without feeling like we're living in someone else's home. I realized what was happening. Eleanor had convinced my son that it was my fault he felt like he was living in someone else's home, that the solution was for him to take the home away from me. Michael, I said, this is the home your father left me. This is where he wanted me to be. I know, he said, and he sounded genuinely sorry. But things have changed. Eleanor and I need to think about what's best for our family, for our children. We can't do that if we don't have ownership of our home. I told him no, firmly, but without anger. I told him that I understood he wanted stability for his family, but taking away my home was not the solution. For 2 weeks after that conversation, the atmosphere in the house was Arctic. Eleanor spoke to me only when necessary. Michael looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and hurt. Sophie and Ethan, my beautiful grandchildren who I loved, seemed to sense the tension and became withdrawn. And then something happened that I'm not proud of. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was being an obstacle to my son's happiness. Maybe Eleanor was right that I should move on, move out, start a new chapter. So I called my lawyer, a man who had handled all of Thomas's estate, and I asked him what my options were. You own the house outright, he said. Your husband left it to you with no conditions. You can live there for the rest of your life if you want. You can leave it to your children in your will. You can sell it if you choose to, but nobody can force you to do anything with it. That was clear. So why did I feel like I was being forced? I think it was because I was lonely, because my son, my middle son, who I loved more than I could express, was unhappy with me, because my grandchildren seemed to be suffering because of this tension, and because I had been taught all my life that a good mother puts her children's needs before her own. So I made a compromise. I told Michael and Eleanor that I would allow them to get a mortgage on the house if they wanted to make it officially theirs, but I wouldn't sell it to them outright. They could buy my equity over time. Eleanor rejected this idea immediately. That's complicated, she said. It would be so much simpler if you just sold it to us, clean and simple. It's not simple, I said, because I need somewhere to live. You could live with David, Eleanor said. Or James, or you could move to a senior community. There are lovely places for women your age. For women your age, as if I was already in the category of women who were past their prime, past their usefulness, ready to be shelved away somewhere safe and out of sight. I felt something harden in me then. Not anger, not yet, but a clarity. This woman did not want me in her life. This woman wanted my son. She wanted my grandchildren, and she wanted my home. And my son, my middle son, who I loved more than I could express, was letting her have all of it. But I still didn't know what to do. I still didn't know how to push back without losing him completely. So I did what I had always done. I stayed quiet. I kept the peace. I made dinner and stayed in my room. I spent time with the grandchildren when Eleanor would allow it. I pretended that everything was fine, even though it wasn't. For another year, this went on. Every day, small indignities. Every day, a reminder that I was unwelcome. Every day, the hope that somehow this would resolve itself, that Michael would see what was happening, that Eleanor would get tired of this game and move on. But none of that happened. Instead, Michael and Eleanor had another child, a baby, a beautiful little girl named Claire. And in some ways, that made everything worse. Because now Michael had a new family, a complete family, a wife and 3 children depending on him, and his aging mother in the house suddenly seemed like a complication rather than a priority. and Eleanor was now the mother of 3, the queen of the castle, and I was the ghost in the corner. That's when I truly became invisible. 2 years after Thomas died, 18 months after Michael and Eleanor moved in. It was a Saturday evening. We were having dinner together, the whole family. David had driven in from out of state. James had flown in from across the country. This was supposed to be a celebratory dinner. We were marking the 2-year anniversary of Thomas's death by all being together. It was supposed to be a moment of family unity. The table was set beautifully. Eleanor had made sure of that. I had offered to cook, but she declined, saying she wanted to make the meal herself. So she did, and it was good. But it wasn't Thomas's favorite foods. It wasn't the recipes that had been passed down. It wasn't our family traditions. We were eating, making small talk, talking about David's business, about James's new job, about the children's school year. And then Eleanor set down her fork, slowly, deliberately. Everyone noticed. The table seemed to stop. "I need to say something," she said, and her voice was steady, calm. This was not a spontaneous outburst. This was planned. She turned to me. "Maggie, I want to be respectful. I want to acknowledge that losing Thomas was hard. I know you're grieving, but we're also living in a house that's become complicated, and I think the kindest thing we can do for everyone is to create a clean break." "What do you mean?" David asked. He could sense something bad was coming. "I mean that I think Maggie should move out," Eleanor said calmly. "I think she should transition into her own place, something that's hers, a fresh start. And I think the timeline needs to be immediate." I felt the room tilt slightly. "Eleanor," Michael started, "we talked about doing this differently." "No, we didn't," Eleanor said, and there was something almost triumphant in her tone. "You agreed that we needed to address this, but you keep putting it off, so I'm addressing it." She turned back to me, and her expression was not unkind. That was the worst part. She genuinely seemed to think she was helping. "I need you gone by sunrise. You have tonight to pack your things. By tomorrow morning, I need you to have left this house. If you're not gone by 7 a.m., I'm calling the authorities to have you removed as a trespasser." The word hung in the air. Trespasser. As if I was a stranger who had broken into her home. James stood up. "That's insane." "It's not insane," Eleanor said calmly. "It's necessary. This situation has gone on long enough, and I think everyone at this table knows that Maggie shouldn't be living here. She should be living her own life." David was looking at Michael. "Are you going to say something?" Michael looked like he was going to be sick. His face had gone pale, and I realized in that moment he had known about this, or at least he had known it was coming. "I think Eleanor is right," he said quietly. The words landed like a physical blow. "What?" James asked. "I think Eleanor is right," Michael repeated, slightly louder this time. "Mom, I love you, but this isn't working, and maybe a clean break is what we all need." I couldn't look at him. I looked down at my plate, at the food that Eleanor had made, at the family dinner that had suddenly become a trial. I got up from the table. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, I would have cried, and I wasn't going to give Eleanor the satisfaction of my tears. I walked upstairs to my room, the room that had been mine and Thomas's for 30 years, the room where he had died, the room where I had been sleeping for 2 years. And I sat on the bed, and I waited for the sun to rise. Around midnight, there was a knock on my door. It was James, my youngest son, the one who lived far away and hadn't been able to be here these past 2 years.
"Mom," he said, and he was crying, "I'm so sorry. She's unbelievable. You don't have to leave. You can come stay with me. We'll figure this out." I hugged him, and that was when I finally broke. I held my son and I cried. For Thomas, for Michael, for the home I was losing, for the family I thought I had that had turned out to be something else entirely. "I'll figure it out," I told him. "I need to do this on my own." "You don't," he said. "You really don't." But I did, because something had shifted inside me that night. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity.
All my life, I had been the one who made things work, the one who kept the peace, the one who sacrificed, and it had gotten me exactly nowhere. So at 3 a.m., in the dark, with James asleep in the guest room downstairs, I did something I should have done much earlier. I picked up my phone, and I made the call that changed everything.
I didn't call a family member. I didn't call a friend. I called an attorney. Not the lawyer who had handled Thomas's estate. I didn't want someone who had connections to my family, someone who might feel obligated to play mediator. I called a family law firm that specialized in what they called elder protection. I know that sounds dramatic, protective services for the elderly, but as I was describing my situation to the woman on the phone, who answered even though it was 3 a.m. and apparently they had a 24-hour line for emergencies, I realized that's exactly what this was. I was being financially pressured. I was being evicted from my own home. I was being made to feel like a burden in a space that was legally mine. "You need to speak with one of our attorneys," the woman said. "First thing Monday morning. Can you come in?" It was Saturday, so I had until Monday morning, but I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I did something else. I packed, but I didn't pack like Eleanor wanted me to pack, tearfully, desperately, like I was fleeing in shame. Instead, I packed strategically. I took photographs of every room in the house. I documented which furniture was mine, which was Thomas's, which had come from my mother. I took photographs of the paintings on the walls, the jewelry in my drawer, the china cabinet my grandmother had left me. I packed all my important documents, my birth certificate, my social security card, my marriage certificate, Thomas's death certificate, the deed to the house, the will, my bank statements, everything that proved I had a legal claim to this house. I packed 3 suitcases of clothes, comfortable clothes, clothes for job interviews, because I realized I would need to work. I hadn't worked outside the home in 43 years, but I would figure it out. And then, as the sun was starting to come up, I walked through the house one last time. I stood in the kitchen where I had made thousands of meals, where I had taught Michael and David and James how to bake, where Thomas and I had our first kiss, leaning against the counter while nobody was home. I stood in the living room where we had opened Christmas presents, where Thomas had taught the boys to play poker, where I had held James when he broke his arm falling off his bike. I stood in the hallway looking at the photographs on the wall, wedding photos, birth announcements, family portraits, a visual history of a life that had been lived in this house. And I said goodbye. I said goodbye to Thomas, to the version of myself that had lived in this house, to the marriage, the motherhood, the identity I had built here. And then I picked up my suitcases and I left. Eleanor was in the kitchen making breakfast. She looked surprised when she saw me in my coat. "You're leaving now?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Do you need help with your bags?" she asked. And she actually sounded genuine, like she really did think she was helping me, like she really did think this was for the best. "No," I said. "I've got them." Michael was not downstairs. I learned later that he had taken the children to a soccer game to avoid being here while I left. My own son couldn't face watching his mother leave the home that had been hers. James helped me put my suitcases in his rental car, and then I climbed into the passenger seat. "Are you okay?" James asked as he pulled out of the driveway. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." We drove to a hotel, a modest place, nothing fancy, just a safe space to sleep for a night while I figured out what came next. And I thought about the call I was going to make on Monday, about the attorney who was going to help me. I realized something that night, lying in a hotel bed that wasn't mine, staring at a ceiling that wasn't familiar. I had spent my entire adult life making sacrifices for other people's comfort, and I wasn't going to do that anymore. The next morning, James and I went to the attorney's office.
Her name was Patricia. She was a black woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and the kind of competence that immediately made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself. "Tell me what happened," she said. So I did. I told her everything. About Thomas's death, about Michael and Eleanor moving in, about the slow erosion of my authority in my own home, about the financial pressure, about the ultimatum. And as I spoke, Patricia took notes. She asked clarifying questions. She didn't look shocked or judgmental. When I finished, she said something that changed my perspective. What Eleanor did is called constructive eviction. It's when someone makes a living situation so intolerable that the legal owner is forced to leave. And what Michael did by pressuring you financially and emotionally is called undue influence and elder abuse, even if he didn't intend it that way. Elder abuse. I had never thought of what happened to me as abuse. "Here's what we're going to do," Patricia said. "First, you're going to stay somewhere safe. With family is best. Then we're going to document everything, every conversation you remember, every financial pressure, every time Eleanor made you feel unwelcome." "Why?" I asked. I don't want to punish Michael. He's my son." "You're not trying to punish him," Patricia said gently. "You're trying to protect yourself. And believe me, when Michael and Eleanor realize you're serious, they're going to come at you hard. They're going to tell you that you're being unreasonable. They're going to try to shame you into backing down. They're going to tell you it's family and that you should just let it go." I felt my throat tighten. She was right. That's exactly what I imagined would happen. "So we need to be prepared," Patricia continued, "and we need to make sure your legal interests are protected." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we might file for a protective order. It means we document any attempts to contact you that feel threatening. It means we gather evidence that this house is yours and that you were illegally evicted from it." I nodded slowly. "But most importantly," Patricia said, "it means we send a letter to Michael and Eleanor letting them know that you're represented by counsel, that you understand your rights, and that you're prepared to defend them." "And then what?" I asked. "And then we wait to see if they try to come after you, whether they try to fight for the house or take you to court or intimidate you in some way. And when they do, we'll be ready." That afternoon, Patricia drafted a letter. It was professional, calm. It didn't accuse Eleanor of anything. It simply stated the facts, that I owned the property, that I was illegally evicted, and that any further contact regarding the property should go through my attorney. She sent it to Michael via email, and then the waiting began. I stayed in James' hotel room for 2 days while he made calls. He was furious with Michael. He called David. They tried to reason with Michael over the phone. Michael's response was devastation. He said that Eleanor had made a mistake in how she handled things, that he never would have let me leave if he had known I would get an attorney involved, that he wanted to fix this, but he didn't offer a solution. And Eleanor apparently made it clear that if Michael wanted to stay in her good graces, he would not invite me back. So Michael was caught between his wife and his mother, and his wife was winning. This is important to understand. Michael was not a villain in this story. He was a man who had married a woman with a stronger personality than him, who was trying to keep his family intact, who didn't know how to navigate 2 powerful women in his life. Eleanor, however, knew exactly what she was doing. She had identified a vulnerable widow. She had moved in slowly, making herself indispensable. She had slowly taken over the space, and when the moment came, she had forced me out. And she had done it with such calm competence that it took me a long time to even understand it as the deliberate strategic action that it was. But I was beginning to understand it now. Over the next week, my attorney sent several more letters.
The first was a formal notice that I was asserting my rights as the legal owner of the property, that any changes to locks, removal of my possessions, or any interference with my property rights would result in legal action. Eleanor's response was to move my furniture into storage, my clothing into bins. She was erasing me from the house, making space for someone else's mother, perhaps. Or maybe she was just making space for the version of this house she wanted to live in, a house without ghosts of the past, without a widow to care for. My attorney sent another letter documenting the removal of my property. And then something unexpected happened. Michael called me, on his own, without Eleanor knowing. He called me at the hotel where I was staying. "Mom," he said, and he was crying. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. Eleanor is talking about selling the house. She says if you don't give up your claim to it, she's going to make our lives hell, and I believe her." I felt something break inside me then. My son was afraid of his wife. He was trapped. And he was calling me to ask me to sacrifice my rights so that he didn't have to deal with her anger. "Michael," I said carefully, "I can't do that. I can't give up my home so that you don't have to manage your wife. That's not fair to me." "I know," he said. "I know, but what else
Can I do? You can stand up to her, I said. You can tell her that you are not okay with how she treated me. You can set a boundary. You can choose your mother." There was a long silence. "I can't do that," he said finally. "She's my wife. She's the mother of my children. I can't choose you over her." "Then I guess we know where we stand," I said, and I hung up the phone. It was the hardest thing I had done since leaving the house, but it was also the clearest, because I realized something. I had spent my entire life being the person who accommodated, the person who sacrificed, the person who made things work by making myself small. And I was done. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. And while it was heartbreaking, it was also liberating. The next 3 months were, objectively, the hardest of my life. I had left the house with 3 suitcases and no plan. I had no home. I had no job. I had no routine. I had been defined by my role as a wife and mother for so long that I didn't know who I was without it. I stayed with James for the first 2 weeks. Then David offered to let me stay with his family for a month. I did, but I felt like a burden, an intrusion, a problem that needed to be solved. So I got a job. It's funny, I had worked before, briefly, when the boys were young. I had been a secretary, but that was 45 years ago. I was terrified that nobody would hire me, that I was too old, too out of practice, too irrelevant. But I walked into a law firm, the same firm that was representing me, actually, and I asked if they were hiring. They were. They needed a receptionist/office manager, someone organized, someone good with people. I got the job. It paid $35,000 a year. Not much by most standards, but it was money I earned myself, money I hadn't asked anyone for, money that was mine. I rented a small apartment, a 1-bedroom in a safe neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I decorated it slowly. I hung pictures. I bought new furniture instead of trying to recreate what I had lost. And I started to rebuild my life. Here's what nobody tells you about reaching a point of rock bottom. Sometimes you find solid ground. My job became not just a way to pay my bills, but a way to reclaim my sense of purpose. I was good at it. My boss told me so. For the first time in 40 years, someone was evaluating my work based on what I actually did, not on how well I took care of them. I made friends, real friends, not just other mothers or wives, but actual women who I chose to spend time with. There was Sarah, who worked at the law firm and became my best friend. There was Dorothy, who lived in my apartment building and who introduced me to a book club. There was Yolanda, who was my yoga instructor and who became a mentor in many ways.
These women knew me for me, not as Michael's mother or Thomas's wife, just as Maggie. And I became someone I had never been before, myself. 6 months after leaving the house, my attorney called me with an update. "Michael and Eleanor want to negotiate," she said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they want to settle. They're offering you a buyout, a sum of money in exchange for releasing your claim to the house." I felt something unexpected when I heard that. Indifference. "How much?" I asked. She told me a number. It was significantly less than the house was worth, but it was enough for me to live on for several years if I was careful. Enough to not have to work if I didn't want to. "Do you want to take it?" Patricia asked. I thought about it. I thought about going back to that house, about seeing Eleanor in the kitchen I had loved, about watching Michael pretend to be happy while his wife controlled his life. "No," I said. "I don't want money. I want something else." "What?" Patricia asked. "I want an apology," I said. "From Michael especially. I want him to acknowledge what he did, and I want him to understand that it was wrong." Patricia sighed. "That's not something I can negotiate for you." "I know," I said, "so tell them no deal." Eleanor and Michael never came back with another offer, but something changed after that. Michael started calling me. Not often, but occasionally. It was awkward at first. He would call and make small talk about the kids, about the house. He didn't apologize, and I didn't ask him to, but there was a shift, a recognition, perhaps, that he had done something wrong, and I hope, that Eleanor's hold over him was weakening slightly. One day, almost a year after I left the house, Michael came to my apartment. He brought Sophie and Ethan with him. They were so much older than I remembered, taller, more mature. They seemed uncomfortable at first, like they didn't know quite how to be around their grandmother. "Hi, Nana," Sophie said carefully. And I held her, and I held Ethan, and for the first time since the night of the dinner, I didn't feel anger or betrayal. I just felt like their grandmother. "I miss you," Michael said. It was the first real thing he had said to me since I left. "I miss you too," I said. But I didn't invite them to stay, I didn't try to fix things, because I had learned something important. Some relationships need space, and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. Michael was facing the consequences of his choices. He was unhappy. He was trapped with Eleanor. He was estranged from his mother. He was the guy who let his wife kick his mother out of her own house. And honestly, I didn't know how to help him with that, so I just loved him from a distance. Now, fast forward 2 more years. I'm 71 years old now. I've been at my job for 4 years. I've been promoted to office manager. I've started taking night classes to get my business degree, something I always wanted to do but never had time for. I travel. I went to Italy with Sarah and Dorothy. I went to see James. I went to visit my sister. I have a life that is fully, completely my own. And recently, something that happened that I think is important to share. Eleanor left Michael. She packed up the house, my house, Thomas's house, the one she kicked me out of, and she moved to the West Coast with a man she met on a yoga class. She left Michael with the 3 kids. She left him with a house he couldn't afford without her income. She left him with a custody battle looming. And Michael called me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I'm saying this too late, but I'm sorry for what Eleanor did to you, and I'm sorry for letting her do it." And I listened, and I accepted his apology. But here's the thing, his apology doesn't change the fact that I had to leave my home. It doesn't change the fact that I spent the most vulnerable time of my life being manipulated and pressured by his wife while he stood by. It doesn't undo what happened, but it does mean something. It means he finally understood, and that's more than I expected. Now the question is, what do I do with all of this? How do I move forward? Michael has asked me to move back to the house. He says he'll buy me out. He says he wants to make it right. And you know what? I haven't decided yet. because I don't know if moving back into that house would be moving forward or moving backward. What I do know is this: I'm okay either way. Whether I move back or stay in my little apartment with my friends and my job and my life that I built myself, I'm okay. And that's the real transformation. It's not about winning. It's not about getting the house back or getting my son back or reclaiming what was lost. It's about getting myself back. For so long, I was Margaret the wife, Margaret the mother, Margaret the woman who kept everything together, but I was never just Margaret. Now I'm just Margaret, and she's pretty great. I want to be honest with you. This story doesn't have a perfect ending. Michael and I are not the close relationship we were before. Eleanor is out of our lives, but her impact remains. The house, my house, Thomas's house, remains legally complicated, and I'm okay with that. Because what I've learned is that perfect endings don't exist, but real, messy, honest life, that does exist, and it's beautiful. This story is for anyone who has felt displaced in their own life, anyone who has sacrificed so much that they forgot to live, anyone who has been told that they're difficult or selfish for wanting more than just existing for other people. I'm here to tell you, you're not selfish, you're not being unreasonable, and you are allowed to want more. Before you leave this video, I need to ask you something important. In the comments below, I want you to answer this question. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt invisible or unwelcome in a place you should have felt safe? What did you do about it? Your answer matters, because the next woman who watches this video might be looking for permission to stand up for herself, and your story might be exactly what she needs to hear. If Margaret's journey resonated with you, if it made you think about boundaries and self-worth and what you might be accepting in your own life, please give this video a like, because YouTube's algorithm decides whether women's stories like this reach the people who desperately need them. And if you're not subscribed to Her Untold Stories, I want to invite you to join our community. Every single
Next week, we bring you stories of women who stood up, women who refused, women who chose themselves. You don't want to miss that. Join us, subscribe, and let's change the narrative together about what women are allowed to want, to need, and to deserve. Thank you so much for spending the last hour with me. That time you gave me, it means everything. Until the next story, remember this: you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to choose yourself, because your life is yours, and nobody gets to take that away from you. This is Her Untold Stories. I'll see you next time.